Today we have the Sons of the American Revolution Color Guard with us. If you could please stand up.
Halt. Right. Peace. Present. Home.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Post colors. Port arms. Right face. Forward hearts.
You may be seated. Good afternoon and welcome to a very special law day. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate you being here. This is the first time in our history where we have had 3 members of our association in public office at the same time. We have Will Robinson in the House. Bill Galvano is the Florida Senate President. And for the first time, we have a member of our association in Congress, Congressman Greg Steuby. Lunch will be served throughout the program, and I have a few announcements to make before we start the program. We would like to thank our annual sponsors, Fidelity Bank, Center State Bank, Firkins Automotive, LawPay, Gettle Automotive, and Lucentian Associates. Today's law firm sponsor is Barnes Walker. Thank you very much, and a special thank you to our past president, Paul Grandal, for the cupcakes that are on the tables. And thank you to the committee that made this event possible. First of all, we have a gift to give away. LawPay has given us a Bose wireless speaker. So if Grace Ann could come to the podium and draw the winning number, that would be great. And after this is over, we're going to give away a $50 gift certificate to Total Wine. So don't throw away your tickets like they did at the Kentucky Derby this year. Okay, so for the winning number.
Nothing in my hand. Three, 340. Yay! What's the prize? I'll go get it.
Grace Ann will bring you the prize. Thank you. Okay. Make sure you're reading your weekly e-blasts. I know it's sometimes a pain to get email, but you won't know what's going on if you don't. Today we have a report from past President Paul Grandal. The nominating committee has met and come up with the slate for the nominations which are going to be voted on in June. So Paul, if you could come to the podium, please.
Thanks, Alex. Afternoon, everybody. In accordance with Article 3 of the Association's bylaws, the nominating committee recently convened. On behalf of the committee, I have the pleasure of reporting our nominations for officer and director positions for 2019-2020. I would ask each of the nominees to stand as their names are called. Charles Telfair, nominated as next year's president. Stephen Dye, president-elect. David Wilcox is a new director and treasurer. Brian Eiton, new director and nominated as secretary. Andre Perrone, director for a 2-year term. Rebecca Proctor, director for a 1-year term, completing a vacated term. And Alexandra St. Paul, our next immediate past president. These nominees will be presented to the membership for vote at the annual meeting in June. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Young Lawyers Division will hold their annual meeting and election of officers on Wednesday, June 12th at noon in the first floor conference room, which is next to Grace Ann's office. Judge Williams has a presentation to make. Am I timely? Perfect. Yay.
Thank you, Alex. I did the same thing in Sarasota about a month ago. I asked the Sarasota County Bar Association how many people knew or remember an assistant public defender by the name of Jim Slater. So can I see a show of hands of people who remember him? In each courthouse that Jim practiced in Sarasota and in Manatee, there is a plaque. And on that plaque are criminal attorneys who mostly practice criminal law, who we honor by presenting the Jim Slater Award. Those of you who do not know who Jim Slater was, he was at one point my supervisor when I worked at the public defender's office, so this award is personal to me. But he also personified certain virtues that as judges we appreciate. And that is to be a zealous advocate for your client and at the same time show respect for the court and respect for your opponent. So this year's Jim Slater Award, which is voted upon by all of the judges, goes to Assistant State Attorney Heather Doyle. Heather? And before Heather says a few words, I'd like to read what it says. The Jim Slater Award for Professionalism, presented to Heather Doyle for professionalism in the practice of criminal law for 2019. Congratulations. Don't forget.
Good afternoon. So many friends here. It's great seeing all of you today. Well, we have some amazing speakers lined up, so I won't take too much of your time. I just want to first thank the judges for setting the example for what it means to be professional and civil. I think we have the best bench in the state of Florida, and we're very, very lucky. And I also want to let you know that I knew Jim Slater. Jim was really special. I was a young lawyer when Jim was practicing, and I think at the time he was actually doing capital cases. And I knew kind of about him before I met him because his reputation was beyond reproach. And I had an opportunity to work with him when he was helping some of the younger lawyers, and he was professional, kind, prepared. He had, you could tell, the utmost of integrity. So to even be considered in the same category as Jim Slater is something that I will always cherish. And I just want to thank you all so very much.
And now Charlie Telfair will introduce Will Robinson.
Thank you, Alex. I'm going to make this short because I want to hear from Will. This year, the Manatee County Bar is recognizing Representative Will Robinson and Congressman Greg Steuby, who are in the first years in their respective positions. We have asked Representative Robinson to talk to us about his first year in the state legislature. He has been a member of the Manatee County Bar ever since he became a member of the Florida Bar, and he was elected as a state representative in 2018. Please join me in welcoming Will Robinson.
Well, thank you all. The great thing about having Congressman Steuby follow me is nothing I say will be any more exciting than what he has to say about Washington and Trump and impeachment and all this other stuff. But I think we had a great session. I really do. And it is certainly my pleasure to speak to you all on Law Day. And I never quite understood it when folks like Congressman Steuby or Representative Boyd or President Galvano would come back home and say, boy, it's great to be home. Well, it's great to be home. I mean, I absolutely loved the 60-day session, but it is a grind, especially those last 2 weeks. And coming home, and I remember I was on a run early morning and smelling the Tropicana air. I'm like, I'm back home, I'm back home. So it is really, really good to come back home. And I've been very blessed to have several members, both living and deceased, of this bar that have given me some great advice. And I'll start off with one of my early mentors was Bill Grimes. I actually worked for Bill Grimes, and he was a state legislator many years ago. And several years ago, he gave me some great advice. And certainly I've spoken to President Galvano, and he's been a great mentor of mine. And I spoke to John Harley before he passed a few years ago, and he was in the legislature for a few years. But probably the best piece of advice I got was from Judge Gallen. Is Judge Gallen here by any chance? Well, anyway, so Judge Gallen served in the legislature for a few years, and he looked at me and he said, well, Will, you know what happened to me? And I said, Judge, no, I don't know. He's like, I lost your uncle as a client when I was in the legislature, so make sure you keep on top of your clients. And, you know, I thought about that. My uncle went to another lawyer, and I could not be doing what I'm doing right now but for the great team that I have at Blaylock Walters. And I've been blessed to be a member of that law firm and, frankly, a member of this bar association for many years. And several of the lawyers are here. I see Cliff and Greg and all sorts of folks here. And they were doing a lot of the yeoman's work during session. So thank you very much. I mean, to me, the attorney-client relationship is one of the most important things in our system of government, our system of law, because I never wanted a client to think that I was putting politics or anything ahead of what they wanted me to do. And so for the attorneys in the Blaylock Walters law firm to step up and to assist me, I'm very grateful for that, because it allowed me to focus on constituent work and getting through that session. And it is something that I'll, believe me, next session I'll need your help as well. So thank you so much. But we are different in the Florida legislature. When you're elected, you're immediately in office. There's no elect, there's no period of time, you're immediately in office. And so I want to and what I've tried to do over the past few months when I've been in office is pull back the curtain a bit. There shouldn't be a secret what I do. It's public service, and I've just tried to explain to folks exactly what I do, my daily job, and frankly over the last couple weeks. So I get to election night, and we were obviously victorious, and my former opponent is here, Tracy Pratt, and she called me and conceded, and that was a very gracious call, and I really always will appreciate that. And frankly, not everyone did that, by the way. That's a very difficult call to make, and I really appreciate that call. And we didn't agree on a whole bunch. We agreed on a few things for our community, but I think we had a great spirited debate, and I really appreciated that phone call. So thank you, Tracy, for that. And Jim then, as our current representative, I felt like I was back in college. He pinned me. He pinned me with the member's pin that actually President Galvano had given to him. So I have the member's pin that President Galvano wore when he was in the State House. So we moved from election night immediately into organizational session, and that's only a couple weeks later. Now, organizational session is where each respective body, the Florida House and the Florida Senate, elects their presiding officer. And I wanted to see my mentor, Bill Galvano, ascend to the Senate presidency. So I went over to the Senate. And the Senate started at 10:30, and I think the House was starting at 10 o'clock. And as the Senate normally does, they're just taking their time. One person gives a speech, and another person gives another speech, and there's speeches after speeches, and I'm like, oh my gosh, is the Senate ever going to stop talking? So they just kept giving speeches, and they finally had a roll call. And my aide texted me, and she said, Will, you're not a senator. Get out of the Senate. Get to the Florida House. You're about ready to be sworn in. So thankfully, I saw President Galvano officially get the votes, and that is exceptionally huge for our area. We've only had, I believe, 2 Senate presidents from Manatee County ascend to that role, and I wanted to see my mentor and frankly, a good friend of mine ascend to that position, and he's done such great work for our community. So I scurried across the rotunda, grabbed my dad. We were able to bring one person on the House floor with us, and I was sworn in. And it was a very special moment. They brought us all, the freshmen, they brought us all up in teams of 5. And you were sworn in right near the Florida seal on the carpet. And certainly when you walk into those Florida House chambers, even to this day, but certainly that first time, you feel the gravity and the weight of what you're doing and the responsibility that you have to all your constituents and frankly to all Floridians. And so you move from organizational sessions to what are called committee weeks. So there's about 6 committee weeks before session starts. And you get this form, and the speaker asks you what committees you want to serve on. And frankly, I only got, I think, one of the committees that I wanted to serve on. But I was very happy with what I was given by the speaker: criminal justice and gaming, ag and natural resources, which is near and dear to my heart, was something that I was appointed to, commerce, and higher education appropriations. And I think we did some outstanding work. And I want to tell you one quick story about one of the committee weeks. And one of the sessions we had in higher education appropriations. Our chairman, Randy Fine from Brevard County, was presiding over the meeting, and we had this very contentious issue with the University of Central Florida. I don't know if you read about this, but University of Central Florida improperly took some money and built a building that it shouldn't have. And so we had to have meetings, and frankly, we had a committee meeting of 3 of the committees together to talk about this issue, and frankly, UCF wasn't taking, in our view, the matter very seriously. So I'm sitting next to the chairman in higher education appropriations, and he starts off the meeting by saying that he has a plan to shut down the University of Central Florida for 5 years. And I remember thinking, wow, I know I'm a freshman, I know they don't really tell us a lot, but I would have thought that I would have been told that they were going to shut down one of the largest institutions in Florida. Suddenly the chairman was not there. I presume the speaker wanted to talk to him very quickly. But it did actually, we didn't close the school, by the way. I had a lot of concerned parents that were frankly upset about that comment. And but what it did do is it drove, I think, some seriousness toward the UCF folks that what they were doing was improper, and they were misusing taxpayer money. But it was certainly something I would never forget as a freshman, sitting next to my chairman and trying to have that poker face, knowing that every time I'm on TV, it's an opportunity for my aide, frankly, to take a screenshot and meme me and send it around to all the aides in the office. But that was a really important and fun part, those 6 weeks right before session, because it allows you to get your feet wet a bit. And then you move into the session. And Florida is a 60-day legislative session. And in contrast to Congress, we got to get in and we got to get out. So any bills that have not been heard or frankly have not been filed or not been through the committee process die after 60 days. And we only have one constitutional requirement, except for redistricting, which we'll do in a couple years, but one constitutional requirement, and that's to pass a balanced budget. That's the only thing we have to do. And we did that. It's a budget of about $91.3 billion. And the stat that I like that sounds high to some folks, and that's a stat that I like to tell folks, is we in Florida just passed New York State as the number 3 in population. So it goes California, Texas, and now Florida. But New York and California are fairly similar in population. New York's budget that they just passed is double of that of Florida's budget. And to me, I find it hard to believe that a New Yorker has twice the quality of life that a Floridian has. So I think our budget addresses a lot of the issues. No budget is perfect. But by the way, this budget only was not approved or was not voted down by 2 Democrats. So it was almost unanimous. This budget was almost unanimous. And I think it does a lot of great things for our state. It provides $3 billion in a rainy day fund and $100 million in a tax cut fund. And I don't believe the governor signed it yet, but I'm sure he'll have some line item vetoes with some pork projects that he may want to get rid of. Because in Florida, unlike the federal system, the governor has the right to line item through projects in the budget that he feels aren't appropriate for the state. Besides the budget, you have policy bills. I believe this is true, but don't quote me on it. We passed the fewest number of bills, I think, in the history of the legislature. Now, to me, as a fiscal conservative, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Less government equals more freedom. And frankly, a lot of those bills include about 10 or 15 different topics. But the bills themselves, if they're not passed through the legislative session, just die. And I think the number is about 197 bills or so. And several of mine, I think 3 of mine passed. One of them passed through another bill. But I think the governor has only vetoed 2 bills at this stage. One of the highlights for me, and frankly it highlights what the governor and the cabinet are doing in Israel right now, the same representative that I mentioned to you about higher education, Representative Fine, is also the only Republican Jewish member in the Florida House. And he actually wrote the bill by hand, he told me. He filed a bill that is the strongest to address anti-Semitism in the state of Florida. And I believe the governor is going to sign this bill in Israel. And it passed unanimously in the Florida House. And it passed unanimously in the Florida Senate. A lot of people talk about, and they should, the divisive debates we have, but many issues pass unanimously or with maybe 1 or 2 folks that don't approve of it. But what was so impactful to me was the story that Representative Fine talked about with his family. Several members of his family died in a concentration camp. Other members of his family, frankly, have been discriminated for generations. And to have a bill like that hit the House floor and to have both sides speak up in debate against abhorrent discrimination was something to me that I'll take with me for the rest of my life. And then finally, and this shows you also, we get to the very last night of session. So all those policy bills that had not been approved, they will die. And it's about 11:30 at night. And I was actually standing there in the House chambers, and 2 freshman colleagues of mine, one Republican, one Democrat. The Republican went up to the Democrat, and his bill was a sex trafficking bill. And the Democrat had a significant problem with it for a variety of reasons. But she was the only one who was going to vote against it, we thought. And the Republican representative said, "Do you mind not debating it and filibustering it? Because if you do, it will die." And she said, "Sure." So she just quietly voted against it. It passed with her 1 no vote, went back to the Senate where it was approved unanimously. So this law passed. It prohibits an abhorrent crime, sex trafficking, which has been an issue in the state of Florida. And it was because of that Democrat. She could have filibustered. And under her right, she has 15 minutes in debate. And she could have run out the clock for the most part. But she decided to quietly vote no and vote her conscience. But a great majority, and actually the House stood up and clapped and thanked her for that because, as I said, 119 or so members of the Florida House voted for that bill. One somewhat funny thing that I did not know as a freshman, I didn't realize that they hazed you when you presented a bill for your first time. I was presenting an appropriations bill for Easter seals. It was for an autism program at their program down near the airport, and it was very important to me. And I get up there, and as the bill sponsor, you have to talk about the bill, and suddenly I'm getting questions out of left field, like what is the total budget of Easter seals in the United States of America? Can you use? And I didn't know this. I didn't know there were Easter seal stamps. Can you use the Easter seal stamps for this appropriations? And finally, I got it that they were just kidding with me. And so after a couple minutes of this, we got done, and I had USF students with me in the audience, and they came out there and they're like, "Representative, does this normally happen? Are they normally this mean to you?" And I said, no, they were giving me a little bit of heartache because it was my first bill as a freshman. So that was a fun time, and they only do it on somewhat minor stuff like that, not on major policy bills. But to get roasted like that was something that we all went through, and was something that I went through as a freshman. We're celebrating Law Day today, and as frankly the representative of this area, it is nothing but an honor to represent you all. And like I said, we had 197 bills that passed the Florida legislature. And I want to pose a question for us on this Law Day. And frankly, it's about how we want our state to govern. I think we had a very, very productive session. But I want us to think about, in terms of governance, do we want to govern as a republic, which is what we are? You all elect me to make decisions on your behalf. And if I do a bad job, or you don't agree with what I'm doing, you have your right as a citizen to vote me out of office. Or are we going to move to more of a referendum democracy where I think where California is, where everything is subject to a vote? I would make note that we have had over or nearly 150 constitutional amendments to our Florida Constitution. And our Constitution's been in effect for about 50 years. Our federal Constitution has had 27. And it's been in effect for, well over 200 years. What we're creating, and believe me, the legislature and citizen-run amendments are equally guilty of this. What we're creating is a second set of Florida statutes. Our Constitution is now becoming filtered with issues that have nothing to do with some of the major things in our Constitution. And so I think we have to be mindful, frankly, in the future of what we're doing, frankly, in the amendment process. And certainly as someone that is in the legislature, and I went through that whole process from organizational session to committee work to session purposely to show you we do a lot of hard work. We're vetting a lot of stuff. A lot of the issues that are approved are the basis of great compromise or of great committee work, or maybe a chairman says, we tried this 2 years ago, let's try it a different way. And while it may not be perfect, I frankly think that some of the issues that we have seen through amendments that have been passed, and I'll identify Amendment 4, which is, I think, a noble amendment. I think everyone deserves a second chance to vote, those that have paid their crime as felons. But we struggled with that issue in the Florida legislature because the amendment had several caveats in it that required us to explain it. And an amendment is not meant to be a 5-page document with all the words and the statutes and everything defined. I mean, we as lawyers look to statutes to make sure things are clear. So I'm worried that if we move more to what I call referendum democracy, that we're going to have more and more problems with us as lawyers and, frankly, judges interpreting what folks are doing. Now, certainly, I want anyone out there who wants to put something on the ballot to have a fair and free opportunity. But certainly we have some important issues out there, whether it's a minimum wage increase or an assault weapons ban, that may come through an amendment process. And my only argument is let our process work, because elections have consequences. And if you don't like what we're doing, you have that choice as citizens. Because I think the amendment process is not doing what we would like it to do. And every time we have an amendment that's passed that is unclear and we have to implement it, the legislature gets accused of not following the people's will, when we're only trying to figure out what's best and the intent of what the voters did. So on Law Day, let's just think about that. Let's think about what the proper approach of our government is. Is it a republic, which I think is what we were founded on, or is it moving in a different direction? And I would submit that it's the former, in my view, that is more appropriate for what we would like to get accomplished and more for what the people would like to see get done. I think we had an outstanding session. And frankly, I may look back on this session, if I'm lucky enough to serve several sessions, as one of the most successful ones. And the reason why I believe it was successful was because of our presiding officers. They set the tone. Certainly President Galvano in the Senate and Speaker Oliva in the House set the tone of civility. I did not want to be involved in inner food fights between the chambers. And we never got any word of that. All of those negotiations, all of those discussions, all of those fights, which I'm sure there were many, were behind closed doors between those presiding officers. We got a chance to do our job, which was debate on the issues. I mean, we were there at 2 in the morning. So anyone that tells you that we don't fight up there, the Democrats don't fight, the Republicans don't fight, I mean, we were there for hours and hours and hours, and I think the process worked. The process worked because everyone got the right to say what they wanted to say, got the right to argue and debate, and while they may not have been successful, they got the chance to be heard. And the presiding officers set the tone. And I'd like to close with a quote, and it's one of my favorite quotes. Speaker Oliva has it on his website, and I've mentioned this many, many times. And to me, it set the tone for the session, and it set the tone for why I believe it was such a successful session. And frankly, this quote is on the Florida House website, and it's from Speaker Leva. Let the debate lean on the strength of our argument rather than the volume of our voice. And to me, that's very instructive, and that's something we tried to do. And I'm very proud to be a member of the Florida House of Representatives. I'm very proud to represent you, and I'm very proud to be a member of our Bar Association.
Thank you, Alex. We are now honored to have Congressman Greg Steuby share his experience as a freshman in the U.S. Congress. Congressman Steuby became a member of this association in 2007 after serving in the U.S. Army and doing a tour in Iraq. He is a graduate of the University of Florida, both undergraduate and College of Law. Upon his honorable discharge from the Army, he worked in private practice. He was first elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2010, where he served through 2016. He was then elected to the Florida Senate and served until 2018, when he was elected to the U.S. Congress. Please welcome Congressman Greg Steuby.
Is Judge Smith still here? I want to know where I can get one of those outfits. That's what I want. Well, thank you, Judge Smith, for inviting me to come and speak. It's great to be back in Manatee County, my hometown. I was born right across the street at the Manatee Memorial Hospital, and I unfortunately don't represent Manatee County anymore, but had the honor to represent Manatee County for 6 years, and this is where it all started for me. We had a debate in 2010, a state house debate. I think my parents were here for that. We had a state house debate when I first got elected to the state house, and we had it here in this room. So it's kind of interesting how we've kind of come full circle. So they asked me to kind of speak about what it's like to be up in Congress and some of the challenges that we face up there, and kind of one of the surprising things that you see up there. So first, I kind of want to talk about how different it is at the federal level versus the state level. We got elected. This is the first time in history that Congress has ever been sworn in during a government shutdown. So we literally got sworn in to U.S. Congress and the government was shut down. So for 3 months, we're supposed to have, so we're in D.C. every week. Usually it's either Monday to Thursday or Tuesday to Friday, and you're supposed to have what's called a district work week once a month. So I'm in D.C. just about every week, and this week is a district work week in this month, but you're supposed to get 1 week a month off. Well, the first 3 months they were up there, because the government was shut down, Speaker Pelosi canceled all our district work weeks until the shutdown got approved. And so we were up there every single week for 3 months straight. We were in D.C. So it's very different than at the state level, where you go up for 60 days, like Will was telling you. You do your work and you get done, which I commend. I wish that the federal government worked the way the state government works. The state government balances your budget every single year. You go up there, you pass bills, you get things done, and you come home. And in the federal level, you could work on things for sessions upon sessions and not get anything accomplished, and I'll kind of touch on that. But being a freshman, getting sworn into a shutdown scenario was very interesting. Most members, especially freshman members, most members of Congress typically sit on one committee, especially if it's what we call an A committee. So if you're on Ways and Means, like Congressman Buchanan is on, you're on just Ways and Means, and then a couple of the subcommittees on Ways and Means. Somehow I ended up on 3 full committees, which sounds great. And it is great. I enjoy the committees I'm on. But at the Florida level, they're smart enough to schedule the committee hearings at different times so that if you're a member on several committees, you can actually get to each one of your committee meetings. They're not smart enough to do that in Washington, D.C. They schedule the Judiciary Committee, the Oversight Committee, and the Veterans Affairs Committee all at Tuesday at 10 a.m. So you have to choose where you want to be and how you're going to get from one place to another. And it's fine if one of the committees has a hearing and you're just asking witnesses questions. It's quite different if you're what's called marking up bills. If you're marking up bills every time there's an amendment, and I'm in the minority now, so when we file amendments to different pieces of legislation that the majority are pushing through the committee, typically every time we'll force a vote on whatever amendment it is that we have on that specific bill. So there's constantly votes happening in markups. So last week I had Oversight had a hearing, Judiciary had a markup, and Veterans Affairs had a markup. One of my bills was up in Veterans Affairs, and all of this was happening at the same time. So I'm lucky to have a good staff that is in different places and literally either physically pulling you out and saying, sir, you have to get to oversight. They're having a vote right now. And they do it alphabetically, so you have time to run from one building to the next building. Yeah, if you ever come to DC and you see me running back and forth, it's because all the committees are meeting at the same time. So that's kind of some of the challenges that you face. But having the ability to sit on, as a lawyer, and I made a note to say this too, we need more lawyers in this process. A long time ago in the history of our country, there was many, many lawyers that ran and were a part of the legislature. John Adams, a lot of historic greats that were practicing lawyers who then ran for Congress and became great congressmen. We don't have that. Very few lawyers now in the process. I mean, if you look at the class of 100 that we just got elected in, very few of us are lawyers. Now, sitting on the Judiciary Committee, they typically try to get members who have some type of legal background or who are lawyers. Every lawyer as a Republican that is on Judiciary, or every member that's a Republican on Judiciary is a lawyer. But the background that provides you for some of the things that we're dealing with right now, I'm sure you've watched the news and you hear all these things about impeachment and you hear that what the Oversight Committee is doing. Having a background as a lawyer to understand all of these principles, and if you read the 448-page Mueller report, understanding some of the things and constraints that both the House has and then the rules of the House, and then the Constitution that overlaps on that, and the separation of powers. It's really kind of fascinating, and we need more lawyers in the legislative process. So I would encourage you, if you ever had a political knack and you're thinking about running for office, we do need more lawyers in the process because it's actually a rarity at the federal level now. You've probably seen what the Judiciary Committee has been spending its time on. Chairman Nadler, who is out of New York, a self-proclaimed liberal Democrat from New York, is spending all of their time in impeachment or oversight type proceedings. And it's frustrating from somebody like me's perspective, not because of the partisan thing, and I'll talk about that briefly too, but you get elected to Congress because there's a list of things you want to go up there and do and serve your country. And there's things that you want to change or affect or file bills on certain areas. And you get up there and all we're spending our time on is investigating a president that you have a 448-page report, the DOJ that's decided not to charge, whether you agree with that decision or not. And so all of what we're doing now is focusing on investigating the investigation or spending more time on regurgitating witnesses that were part of that investigation. They tried to get Don McGahn last week. The Judiciary Committee chairman tried to bring Don McGahn on, who was the general counsel for the White House. Now, you guys are all lawyers who understand this. The president is not his client. The White House is his client. So there's obviously attorney-client privilege that attaches to that because the White House is the client. And so as a senior advisor to the president in the White House, and now they're asking that individual to come in and testify, of course the president is going to exert executive privilege on those privileged communications, because if you know as the president that any one of your senior advisors could be subpoenaed by Congress, forced to come in, are you going to talk frankly with your counsel and ask him questions and get frank advice from your counsel? We as lawyers kind of understand that, but those are the separation of power challenges that we're facing right now, and I happen to be right in the middle of all this in the Judiciary Committee and the Oversight Committee. So that's the frustration from somebody like me who has things, and I'll talk about some bipartisan things that I'm working on, who has things that I want to get done for the betterment of our country, but we're spending all of our time on things that I don't think is going to move the country forward in any way, shape, or fashion. We brought in, I sit on oversight, they brought in Michael Cohen. What was the legitimate legislative purpose to bring in a convicted liar to come and testify before Congress? He was convicted for testifying and lying to Congress. And we brought a guy who is convicted for lying to Congress, to a committee in Congress to testify. And that's some of the things that's frustrating that you want to try to get things done. That's what the Oversight Committee's been on. I will talk about Veterans Affairs, being a veteran who served. And there is some light that's going on in Washington right now. There is a group of freshmen, there's about 100 of us, Republican and Democrat, that got elected this last cycle. There's about 20-something of us that are post-9/11 veterans, so either served in Iraq or Afghanistan. We've created a new caucus. It's called For Country. You had to have served post-9/11 in either Iraq or Afghanistan or some combat zone after post-9/11. And all we're focused on is veteran-related or military-related legislation. We all come in together, and it's actually the way, in my opinion, government should work. The partisanship is left at the door. We're all vets. We come in. We talk about whatever bills as it relates to veterans that are working through the process. We all sit around a big conference table in the Cannon House office building. I talk about the bills that I'm working on. I can talk about briefly. They talk about bills that they're working on. We vote as a caucus, a bipartisan caucus, as to whether our caucus is going to support those pieces of measure. If we vote as a caucus to support it, then the whole caucus as a whole signs on as co-sponsors, so you get a bipartisan support there. And several of us, Connor Lamb's a Democrat, he's on this caucus, and he's also in the Veterans Affairs Committee. Several of us also sit on the Veterans Affairs Committee, so then we can shepherd some of these pieces of legislation through. You'll probably never hear about any of these pieces of legislation in the newspaper or on TV because they're not, flashy and sexy and going to make top-line news, but they're actual things that are going to help our veterans. One of the biggest challenges that we're facing, and I'm open to suggestions if anybody has ideas of how to solve this crisis, but we have 21 veterans a day killing themselves. If you know how to solve that crisis, I would love to know how. So those are kind of some of the things that we're working on, and getting a focus from both Republicans and Democrats to really fight for our country, I think, is very important, and you don't see that going on in Washington. And so somebody asked me, what's the biggest surprise or change, or what surprised you the most when you got elected to Congress? Was I would say wholeheartedly the partisanship, especially coming from the Florida Senate. The Florida Senate is a body of 40 senators, and your district is almost the size of a congressional district. I had all of Sarasota County and the western portion of Charlotte County, and I had about the population, a little bit less than I have now, in a congressional seat, but there's only 40 senators in a state with 22 million people, so your district's pretty large. We would work together on things. I chaired the Florida Senate Judiciary Committee. I would say 40% of the bills that I heard as the chairman of that committee as a Republican, and we had the majority, were Democrat bills. If you had a good idea, and I thought it was a good idea, I'd put it on the agenda, and we'd hear it, and we'd vote it out. That doesn't happen in Washington, D.C. Everything is so hyper-partisan, and I'll give you a quick example just to illustrate how bad it is. So if any of you ever come to D.C., I'm in Cannon. I'm on the 5th floor Cannon. It's kind of so Cannon is the oldest House office building. It was built in 1908, and I have, if you kind of scoot your chair a little bit, I have a view of the Capitol Dome from my office. My office, Adam Putnam had my office, Donald Rumsfeld had my office. It's true to its age of 1908, so they're doing a refurbishment of Cannon. There's right next to, so there's 3 members on my hallway, and we're on a non-refurbished side because it's all seniority in DC, and if you're a freshman, you get stuck in the closet in Cannon with the old offices. But right next to my office is a conference area, a conference room, and it is literally right next to the door that you come out of my office, there's a conference room. And we requested, you have to request through the speaker's office the use of different buildings because they're in charge of the buildings. So there's an empty conference room right next to my office that nobody's using. The lights are off. The only reason I know that it's a conference room because I opened my window, climbed out on the balcony, crawled down the side to look in the window to see that there's actually a conference table in there, then walked back on my balcony and came back in, and we requested to have that space because if a group, let's say, the Manatee Bar wants to come up to DC and do a trip, and I have 10 or 12 of you, you don't all fit in my office, back to the whole freshman, not senior, small office thing. So to have like a conference area to have and meet with people would be great. So we did a formal request through the channel of command to the speaker's office, and we were told no because I'm a Republican. You weren't going to use that office. That's the level of partisanship that you have in Washington, D.C. That space is not being used by anybody. So what I've thought about doing is asking Susie Lee, who's a Democrat from Nevada, who's my neighbor, to be like, hey, can you get the key to this conference area that's next? Because she's a Democrat, so she'll probably get approved to get it. But those are some of the challenges that you face up there. And I'll give you a couple more examples sitting in the Judiciary Committee. The very first bill that we had was a bill on, they called it universal gun checks or universal background checks. I call it a gun control bill. We brought that bill was brought by the Democrats into the House Judiciary Committee. The Republicans had filed 109 amendments to that piece of legislation. When I chaired a committee in the Florida Senate, I don't care how many amendments you filed as a Democrat, we heard every single one of them, we vote them up or down. If we're gonna be there till 2 o'clock in the morning, then so be it. We're gonna be there till 2 o'clock in the morning to hear every single one of your amendments because you're a member of this committee and you have the right to do that. We got through 7 amendments in 8 hours. and they moved the previous question, but they didn't even follow their own rules, because in order to move the previous question on a bill under the rules of the House and the rules of the Judiciary Committee, you have to have a motion substitute, an amended substitute to that bill, which they didn't do. So they completely ignored their own rules, moved the previous question, they had the majority, and they voted us out. They are now doing that, and finally it got to the point where they were abusing the majority power in the Judiciary Committee, where they have now started to back off some of that. But even just filing an amendment to get your amendment heard is being struck down. I'll give you another example. And well, let me tell you about one of the amendments that I had on that bill, because we've got some law enforcement here that can kind of talk about this. One of the amendments that I did to the universal background check bill in the Judiciary Committee, and we did it again on the floor, and we actually won on the floor on a motion to recommit, was if somebody goes to a firearms dealer and attempts to illegally purchase a firearm, so illegal immigrant, criminal. So as you know, if you go to a firearms dealer and you try to purchase a firearm, they do a background check. If it comes back and just says denied, then the firearms dealer doesn't know why you were denied, just says, sorry, sir, I can't sell you the firearm. These guys don't get called. Nobody knows that John Smith walked into Bullet Hole in Sarasota and attempted to buy an AR-15, but he was a criminal and he was denied that ability to purchase an AR-15. So I filed an amendment to the bill, which I thought was kind of common sense. If you have a criminal or an illegal immigrant, which, by the way, the largest population of people trying to illegally obtain a firearm in this country is illegal immigrants. If you had an illegal immigrant or a criminal to try to go into a firearms dealership to purchase a firearm illegally, and the background check from the NICS system bounces back from the federal NICS system and says, you can't purchase a firearm, that would require local law enforcement to be notified by the FBI that John Smith just tried to go to the Bullet Hole in Sarasota and he has a felony conviction for armed robbery. You may want to go talk to John Smith as to why he's trying to illegally purchase a firearm. That's what my amendment did. It required that if somebody failed a background check in the purchase of a firearm at a federal firearms dealer, local law enforcement would be notified so they can go and have a conversation with Mr. Smith. Every single Democrat on that committee voted against the amendment. And it was almost identical to the exact language that two members of the committee had as a bill last year in last Congress. That's the level of partisanship. And I would think bipartisan, there's not a single person in this room, Republican or Democrat, that thinks it's a bad idea if a criminal or an illegal immigrant is trying to illegally obtain a firearm at a firearms dealership, that the sheriff shouldn't be notified of that. Kind of common sense. And that's the challenges that we face in Washington, D.C. In the first 3 months, the Speaker's office, and again, this doesn't happen at the state level. At the state level, bills get filed, they get referred to committees, those committees vet that legislation. Now, if it's a Speaker priority or a Senate President priority, instead of having 4 committees that it goes to, it may have only 1 or 2, but bills don't go straight to the floor. At the federal level, bills can go straight to the floor without a single vetting in any committee, and the Speaker invokes the rule. And the rule is not a single member of the entire House, Republican or Democrat, can file an amendment to that bill. For the first 3 or 4 months, almost every single bill that we voted on the floor came straight from the Speaker's suite without a single vetting in a single committee, with invoking the rule that not a single amendment can be filed, even by their own members, and that all you get as a member of the House is an up or down vote. Most Americans don't realize that that's possible, that that can be done in our House of Representatives, but it absolutely can be done, and it has been done. Much more frequently than I think it should be done. I think it should be done the way that we do it in Florida. If you're a member of Congress and you got elected to represent your constituency and you feel passionate about something, that you file a bill on an issue and it gets referred to a committee, then that committee should have the opportunity to vet that legislation. If it passes the committee, great. If it doesn't, it dies, and try again next year, and it goes through the process, gets to the floor. Any member that's been elected in the United States of America can file an amendment to that bill. They have the opportunity to discuss it. You vote it up or down and you move on. But that's not what's been going on up there. And so that, I would say, is probably the biggest surprise that I have seen in having 8 years of legislative background at the state level and going to Washington, because most people don't realize that the Speaker's office has so unfettered power in the Speaker's office to be able to do things like that and force their own members on an up or down vote. So a couple other things that I don't know if we want to open it for questions, but a couple other things that somebody wanted me to talk about was TV hits or going on TV. So if you're not doing anything at 1:30, so I'm going to have to leave here in about 7 minutes very quickly. if you're not doing anything at 1:30, you want to turn on Fox News, Harris Faulkner, I'll be on to talk about the Mueller report. But it's not at all what you think it is. It's not glamorous at all. I call it the hole. They literally take you and you're in a hole, and it's all blacked out. And so yesterday I did an interview with Fox Business, and it's incredibly challenging because I'm a visual guy. Like if you talk to me, and my wife will tell you this, if she tells me something, I won't remember. But if you write it down and I read it, I'll remember it. So everything's coming in an earpiece. So you're sitting in a black hole. You're looking into a camera, and you'll see at 1:30, Harris Faulkner will be, "Oh, great to see you again, Congressman." She can't see me. She's not looking at me because she's looking into the camera too. And I can't see her. She'll be like, "Oh, great to see you," and I'll be like, "Oh, great to see you too." And I'm like, "I'm just looking into a camera." And so they're talking into you in an earpiece. And what's funny is the producers of the show also have access to the vocal. So Harris Faulkner will ask you a question. So last night I was on Fox Business, and they were asking me a question, and this is what the subject matter was going to be, some Trump tweet about North Korea and something or other. And then the producer comes in while the show guy is asking me a question. He says, "All right, you got to keep your answer quick. You got to keep your answer brief because we're going to move to the next segment." So you got him talking to you. You got the guy asking you a question. You're not looking at anybody. You're looking into a camera, and you're like, yes, sir, exactly. That's and then they cut you off and they move to the next thing. So it's been interesting because it's not what you think. You're like sitting in the room with these people and you like get to sit down. Nope, not like that at all. I will run to a studio here in Sarasota County, put an earpiece in, look in a camera, and you're talking to somebody in New York, which is pretty fascinating. You'll have the producers go, "Hey, can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can hear you." "Okay, here we go." So it's kind of interesting, but I will say being involved in the issues that we get to be involved in, especially as in the Judiciary Committee, it just happens to be where a lot of the issues are happening today. But I will tell you, there are some things that I still don't think it's hit me yet, where you are. Last week we had a briefing on Iran. It was a top secret SCI briefing for members only. And so you're sitting in there in a room a little bit bigger than this with the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, Chief Joints of Staff, and a head intel guy getting a top secret briefing on what's going on over there. So it's an honor. So thank you very much.
Will and Greg, please.
Oh, cowboy hats?
Cowboy hats.
Now I know why my
So
dad
now-
asked what size hat I wear.
So it turns out Will's got to get some cowboy boots,
I
but
got
Greg, you're all set. So, thank you,
No,
gentlemen.
that's not it.
That's not it, this one?
No. Okay.
Which one do you
We're
want?
gonna have to switch out sizes.
Yeah, we're going to have to switch out sizes.
Dad must have told you the wrong size.
I apologize.
Is that your size?
7 3/8. If I put this on, it's gonna look really ridiculous.
I've always been told
Sorry
not to
about
put a hat on. So.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have a couple of announcements, and then we're going to pick the winning Total Wine $50 gift certificate. Next month, June 26th is our annual meeting, and we're going to elect our officers. Also, June 26th, please bring school supplies, meaning your office supplies, pens, pads, things like that, for Lori Dorman's AVID class at Sugg Elementary, because they need school supplies. So we're going to try to help them out. So try to make a note to yourself to bring them to the next meeting. Thank you, Charles Clapsaddle, so much for everything. Without him, we would not be here doing our recording today. And thank you, Charles and METV. You've been great. Thank you.
That was so close.
Okay, well, I think we are adjourned. Thank you so much for coming today.